honey, I'm thinking of heading out for a drive. Care to join me? My mother's voice echoed. Glancing up, I responded, Thanks, Mom, but I think I'll pass. Where are you headed? I thought I'd take that scenic route through the forest by Rockefeller Mountain. She replied with a hint of excitement. All right, have fun, I said. With a gentle kiss on my cheek, my mother departed. I sat there, listening as the hum of the car's engine faded into the distance. Settling into the couch, I grabbed some snacks from the fridge and began mindlessly watching an old war film. The movie, combined with the coziness of the couch, gradually pulled me to sleep. As quick as I fell asleep, an insistent vibration of my phone jerked me back to consciousness. Rubbing my eyes, I picked it up and was met with a series of missed call notifications, all from my mom. I tried returning her calls, but each attempt was met with her voicemail. Glancing at the clock, it read 10:48 p.m. She'd left at precisely 3:23 p.m. No drive, especially on that trail, would take that long. A storm of thoughts began to rage in my head, each more worrisome than the last. Had she gotten lost? Had the car broken down? Or was it something worse? As these scenarios whirled around in my mind, a sharp, sudden sound pierced through the air, the ring of the doorbell. I sprang from the couch, feet pounding the wooden floor as I raced to the door. The narrow view through the peephole revealed the face of my mother, but something was off. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth, seemed distant, almost hollow. Swinging the door open, my voice was a mix of relief and frustration. Where have you been all this time? She met my gaze, those unsettlingly vacant eyes seeming to peer right through me. Silent, she brushed past me with an air of detachment, making her way to her room without uttering a word. The next day was somewhat normal. I found her in the kitchen, going through the familiar routine of preparing breakfast, but there was a change in her demeanor. Our usual conversations was absent, replaced by silence. As I readied myself for work, I tried to bridge the gap. Hey, Mom, I'm heading off to work. See you later. All I received was a nod, a silent acknowledgement, leaving a cold space where her usual warm response would be. I got off of work late. I pulled into the driveway around 2 a.m., trying not to make a sound. I crept into the house, not wanting to wake my mom. I tiptoed through the dimly lit halls towards the kitchen to grab some snacks and take them to my room. But when I flicked on the kitchen light, there she was, my mom, standing still, staring outside the window towards our backyard. The sight took me aback. Mom? Why are you up? What are you looking at? I waited for a reply, but silence hung in the air. Shrugging it off, I said, work was all right today. Left a bit early after some friends took off. While grabbing my stuff from the fridge, I couldn't help but ask, You okay, Mom? She answered, still staring out at the yard, Yes, okay. The way she spoke was odd. It was too upbeat, like she was thrilled about something. It didn't fit the moment at all. It was just off. Grabbing my snacks, I headed straight to my room, leaving the kitchen lights on for her. Morning came with the familiar smell of breakfast. On weekends, Mom would cook since there was no rush for work. I headed downstairs, calling out, Good morning. I grabbed some juice and sat. She replied cheerily, Good morning, sweetie, looking like her usual self. She asked about work and how I slept. I wanted to remind her we'd talked the night before, but I didn't. I repeated what I'd said, and she acted like it was new information. We chatted more, then settled to eat. As I sliced into my pancakes, something caught my eye. I pulled out a tiny, gleaming sewing needle from the soft center. My heart raced as I held it up, asking, Mom, what's this? I held the needle aloft, the sharp point catching the light. This was in my pancakes, I stammered. Looking at it, her face reflected genuine concern. She hurriedly assured me, I'm so sorry. I'd never want to hurt you. Truly, her embrace was warm and comforting. Don't eat any more of that. I'll whip up a new one. Her words almost made me feel guilty for suspecting her. It was just so bizarre that doubt naturally crept in. The day proceeded without another hitch. Laughter, movies, gossip, and our ritualistic good night capped it off. I climbed into bed around 10:30 p.m. As a kid. I had a paralyzing fear of the dark. To combat this, my mom had placed 2 nightlights, one in my room and another in the hallway. Though my room was now devoid of the light, the hallway still had its comforting glow. Awakening for a sip of water, I froze. The glow from under my door was intermittently obscured. A shadow. Someone stood there. Stifling my breath, I watched it for what felt like an eternity, the shadow unwavering. "Mom," I said softly. There was no reply. Instead, the shadow receded, gliding silently towards her room. Morning found me weary. The haunting shadow, the weight of eyes on me, made sleep impossible. I confronted her at breakfast. "Mom, were you outside my room?" "Around a.m." She evaded the question. Instead, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "Do you remember letting me brush your curls when you were little? Let's do that now." Beside the sink, conditioner and a brush awaited. Recent events screamed caution, but this was my mom. I relented, sinking into the familiarity of her touch. As she worked on my tangles, time melted away. Our conversation continued as she rinsed my hair. But as I was talking, I suddenly felt a hard grip tighten in my hair. Without warning, my head was forced into the water filling the sink. Panic overtook me. I was being drowned. It's surprising how weak you feel in a situation like this, with your mind racing and someone using their entire weight to hold you down by the back of your head. My arms flailed, at times trying to push myself up using the edges of the kitchen counter. After what felt like an eternity, the grip released. Gasping and coughing, I pulled my head out of the water and spun around to confront my mother. "What the fuck are you doing?" I yell while trying to make sense of what just happened. That was the first time I actually cussed at my mom, but I mean what the actual hell. She started laughing, pointing at me with one hand while the other kept slapping her knee. "I got you. You should have seen your face." Staring in shock, my displeasure was clear enough that her laughter faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Come on, don't be upset. It was just a joke." She stepped closer, arms open for a hug. I quickly sidestepped, keeping distance between us, a wary expression evident on my face. I was genuinely afraid. That wasn't the kind of joke my mother would make. She'd never take a prank to such extremes, certainly not one that could hurt me. It was at this moment I realized something was terribly off about her. In fact, I began to doubt if she was really my mother at all. From then on, I became distant. Our conversations were minimal, only out of necessity. I began to avoid meals, spending more time locked in my room. Those eerie nights when she'd stand outside my door persisted. It was like clockwork, always around the same hour. And every night, after a while, the shadow would recede. I grew more anxious, opting to leave the house frequently, taking refuge at friends' places, just to avoid being home with her. She stopped going to work altogether. During the day, she'd be in the backyard, engaged in strange activities, digging random holes, thrusting a trowel into the ground, or just standing there, seemingly talking to herself, though I could never make out the words. However, last night's event is one that will forever be etched in my memory. Before drifting to sleep, I recall praying for an uninterrupted night's rest. The mere sight of her shadow under my door had become a haunting and fearsome nightly ordeal. I found myself jolted awake in the pitch blackness of my room. Reluctantly, I shifted my gaze to the bottom of my door. As I feared, her shadow was there. She was standing just outside, silent as ever. I tried to force myself back to sleep, but given the circumstances, sleep eluded me. Then something different occurred. A knock. 7 soft, deliberate knocks. After the knocks, silence consumed the room. Lying there, fear paralyzed me. What was different tonight? Why did she decide to knock now? A chilling thought struck me. My door didn't have a lock. It never did, even from my childhood. The last semblance of a barrier between us wasn't even secured. The eerie knocks resumed, more insistent this time. Knock, 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 knock. Reacting instinctively, I pulled the covers over my head, clinging to those childhood beliefs of safety. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't protect me now. The sound of the door creaking open made my heart pound harder. I braced myself, waiting for the sound of footsteps, but there were none. Had she retreated? Or was she just standing there watching? Minutes dragged on in terrifying silence. Then, suddenly, there was a rapid, scuttling noise. It sounded impossibly fast, moving from the floor to the walls to the ceiling. The entire room echoed with it. Blind terror overcame me, thoughts racing uncontrollably. Is she crawling on all fours? How is she moving so fast? What is she doing? Am I going to die? These fears consumed me until darkness took over. Whether from stress or sheer panic, I lost consciousness. Gratefully, it spared me from whatever horror unfolded that night. When morning light finally greeted me, my room was a mess, everything thrown into chaos. It was nowhere in sight. Did it leave? Is it in the house still? These questions remain unanswered. Gathering my courage, I finally left the safety of my bed and managed to prop a chair against the door for some semblance of security. I'm at a loss for what to do next or whom to turn to. But one thing is certain, I can't spend another night here. The house has been eerily silent since I woke up. I'm preparing to remove the chair and make a break for it. So far, there's been no sound outside my door, which I hope means the coast is clear. Story 2. I'm the chef that cooks death row inmates their last meal. My secret ingredient came back to bite me. The botched execution of Norton Carraway, the most prolific serial killer you've never heard of, should have made national headlines for weeks. But Carraway was so much more than your average garden variety killer, and the factors that made his case so special also made it embarrassing for powerful people with means to make unsightly stories go away. That meant in the hours that followed, I had very little information to go on. Just the details I'd seen firsthand in the witness gallery, and the gnawing feeling it was all my fault. I paced until I thought I'd wear a hole in my apartment floor, replaying the events in the hopes that some logical explanation would let me off the hook. Guards led Carraway into the chamber, scalp-shaved bald. They restrained him in the electric chair, the method he had fought in court to have over lethal injection. When the executioner threw the lever, Carraway convulsed. I kept waiting for the shaking to stop. Instead, it worsened. I don't think I'll ever forget the screaming and the smell of burning skin. Prison staff shut the curtains to the witness gallery and rushed us out. I left knowing he was still alive and silently prayed with each passing moment that I would get the call confirming his death. When my cell phone finally did ring, It was Warden Paul Perkins, calling from his personal number. I answered. "Hello, we need to talk about Caraway's last meal." My blood felt cold. What did he know? How could he know? I don't, in person. I've never driven so fast. It's a miracle I didn't get pulled over. I reached the penitentiary before dawn. Place looks like an old high school, wrapped up in barbed wire. An uneasy silence filled the long, sterile corridors. The guards I passed looked twitchy and unnerved. The whole prison seemed to be on its feet, waiting for something. The warden greeted me in his modest office, all bookshelves and filing cabinets with a small window overlooking the plains. "It's been a long night." He gestured toward 2 steaming mugs of coffee on his desk. "Sit. Drink." I obeyed. "I didn't think you stayed for executions," Paul said. "Usually don't." The warden lowered himself into his chair with a huff. Why was last night different? I studied his pudgy face, normally bright, kind, and clean-shaven. This morning, his eyes were bloodshot. "A victim approached me," I said. "Give him a grain of truth, something he may know anyway." It made this case feel more personal. "Who?" "Rebecca," I said. "She tracked me down and knocked on my door." The poor woman had looked so thin, like she'd forgotten to eat. Mismatched, wrinkled clothes. Paul just looked at me expectant. I continued. I felt awful for her. So I invited her in. Made her dinner, then let her talk about her daughter, among other things. "Oh, if only she had just gone home. I know you were doing a nice thing. But I'd be careful around her," Paul said. He took a sip of coffee and smacked his lips. "When Rebecca's daughter went missing, did you know that she was the prime suspect?" "No, I didn't. A lot of people up in that tiny town still believe Rebecca is the strangler. Seems none of them are eager to open those old wounds." Paul set the coffee down. "In the early days, back when it was only a disappearance, a K-9 officer paid her a visit. He wanted one of Daniela's favorite stuffed animals. Something to let the dogs catch her scent. Know what they found?" I shook my head. "Weird stuff, Kathy. Runes, weird little dolls, and animal bones." She told the cop she'd been doing a ritual to bring her baby back, Paul said. She couldn't tell them where she was when Daniela went missing. So they booked her. Caraway was well-trained, disciplined. Waited as long as he could, I expect. But that urge. He trailed off. He couldn't help himself, I expect. Had I given too much away in mentioning Rebecca? Point is, Rebecca might not have done anything to her daughter. But she's not safe or sane, Paul said. I'm getting sidetracked, though. The execution. You stayed out of sympathy, then? Sure, you could call it that. Okay, Paul nodded. Well, things got a bit hectic after you left. Shall I fill you in? I nodded. Executioner cut off the power at the 20-minute mark. Way longer than it's supposed to take. Paul took a deep breath. By that point, Caraway looked like a half-spent candle. Bastard wasn't just alive. He was coherent. Begging for death. How is that possible? I asked. I knew exactly how. The question was, did the warden? Problem with the chair, maybe, the warden shrugged. I made the call to override his wishes. He got the lethal injection and stopped breathing at 3:45. Caraway was dead. I relaxed a little in my chair, but tried not to show a change in my posture. Why did you get into this job, Kathy? Paul asked. The shift in questioning caught me off guard. Where was he going with this? Honestly, I asked. I hate when you say that, he said. Implies you've been dishonest about everything else. I picked a terrible time to be a chef. Restaurants going under right and left. What was it, 25% in the whole country this year? Something like that, Paul agreed. Any halfway decent owner wanted a chef with serious culinary experience. Sleazy ones wanted to get me on server staff so they could see my ass in one of those tiny uniform skirts, I said. You were my only option. Cooking last meals for death row inmates has its perks, Paul said. No bad reviews to worry about, no repeat customers either. The ideal learning environment. He curled his lips into a smile. But that was years ago. You've got your degree now. More than enough talent and experience. Anyone would have hired you. The challenge, I said. I mean, you're cooking someone's last meal. You only get one of those unless you're Norton Carraway. No other reason? The warden asked. I answered honestly. No, he leaned in. You didn't ever like to mess with them? Who? The prisoners. You ever mess with their food? He knew. He knew, and he saw it in my eyes. What's going on? Engineer took a look at the chair. Paul bit his lip and shook his head. Nothing wrong with it. So after Carraway's heart stopped, I ordered an autopsy. Maybe he had some freak medical condition. I don't know what I was expecting. The warden went on, his voice starting to shake with anger. You know what I find? What? DNA. A victim's DNA. Daniela's blood, mixed in with the food in Carraway's stomach and intestines. My face felt prickly. Stress sweat tricked down my forehead, stinging my eyes. Her what? I'm asking you this as a courtesy, because I consider you a friend. Did you tamper with Carraway's last meal? I opened my mouth. And before you answer, he cut me off. Keep in mind what's going to happen here. Sure, the state wants to keep this one low profile. But they'll still need to at least investigate what went wrong. Might do their own autopsy. Maybe take a look at your other meals. I need to know how long this has been going on. Was this always some karmic justice for you? Like spitting in a rude customer's food on a just sick level. Paul, you don't understand. I'm sorry, Kathy, I've got to fire you. You can walk away clean. If you don't make a fuss, I don't think they will either. Food tampering? Then it clicked. Paul only thought I'd been tampering with their food. He harbored no suspicions anything supernatural even happened. He didn't know what I'd done. The ritual that evil woman had convinced me to play a part in. I thought back to Rebecca and the vial she had given me along with a tattered recipe card. Execution is too good for him, she'd said. Feed Carraway this, and he will never know peace. Where had she gotten her daughter's blood for the concoction? Why did the lethal injection work when the electric chair failed? A blaring siren from some distant watchtower answered my second question. Prisoner escaped, the warden muttered under his breath. He reached for his phone. Before it was halfway from its cradle to his ear, a corrections officer barged into the room, panting. What's happened? Are you all right? Paul gestured to the front of his uniform, soaked in blood. It's not mine. Then whose? Who's down? The coroner, the warden, had gotten halfway to his feet when he froze. His brow wrinkled. Wait, then who's missing? Carraway, my breath caught in my throat. Carraway's body is gone. Autopsy report too. Someone must have broken in and dragged it off. They can't have gotten far. How many hurt? Half dozen, the officer panted. Pretty badly too. I don't know about Hopkins and Clark. Medics are with them, but... The officer trailed off. How about you? You're not wounded? Paul asked. No, sir. Good. You'll need to keep Kathy safe in my office until those freaks are caught. You'd have to be some special kind of screwed up to try stealing a famous killer's body. Yeah, I agreed. He jabbed one of his sausage fingers in my direction. Don't think I'm done with you. This isn't over. He had no idea how right he was. The corrections officers didn't catch them. Little did they know, there wasn't a them to catch. A member of the riot team made raving claims, said he'd fired dozens of rounds into the charred, disemboweled corpse of Norton Caraway. He just kept coming, howling in pain the whole time. The warden's preferred explanation felt equally far-fetched to me. The unnameable agency that had honed Caraway into a ruthless instrument of death wanted his body for some clandestine purpose. So they took it. Staff buried an empty box in the prison cemetery and pretended the night had never happened. Theories of witchcraft or an undead man fighting his way out of the penitentiary never crossed anyone's mind. If everyone was willing to forget, perhaps I could too. But I couldn't. He had the warden's autopsy report, the one that raised questions about his last meal and the woman who cooked it. I kept thinking of the way he studied me, how normal he'd looked. He was average height and in decent shape. Neat, combed hair, atop a round face, with a small nose. Nothing about him was intimidating or even remarkable. Difficult to pick out of a lineup. Paul quietly let me go from my job at the prison. Felt like I got off easy for what I did. I decided to put my talents to other uses. I'm working on setting up a non-profit that helps provide hot meals to victims' families. Setting it all up involved a lot of phone calls to try and secure money. That meant a lot of unknown numbers popping up on my caller ID. So when my cell rang one weekday evening, I answered without hesitation. "Hello, Kathy speaking. Kathy, I've just learned the most interesting recipe. You should cook it for that charity of yours." The voice was wheezy and labored. "It's to die for." The caller let out a laugh somewhere between cackle and coughing fit. "Who is this?" I demanded. But I knew. Rebecca told me everything I needed to know in the end. "Told me how to reverse what you bitches did to me," Caraway said. "The bullets weren't the worst of it, frying in that chair. Being paralyzed while they cut me open to dig around in my guts," he raved. "I felt everything. I still feel everything. The pain is constant." I kept the phone close to my ear, turning on the spot to ensure my windows and doors were secured. I kept expecting the man's marred remains to leap out at me. "But you can take that pain away," Caraway rasped. "I'd be honored, Kathy, if you'd have me over for dinner." My phone buzzed with a text message notification. A new image. Bony fingers wrapped in disfigured skin pinched the edges of a recipe card. "Dinner for two," I read aloud. The witch could only push around pain and suffering from one person to the next. "Daniela to me, and now me to you," Caraway said. "Follow those instructions, and you'll have a proper last meal for me and for me?" I asked. Caraway laughed. "You'll take on my suffering. Every pinprick of pain I've felt since I ate that cursed dinner you served me. It's a heavy burden, I admit. If I refuse, I'd hoped your conscience might get the better of you. Or at least some sense of responsibility for what you unleashed," he sighed, his labored breath crackling in the receiver. "Rebecca said we both needed to eat willingly. I can't force you to cook or eat, but I can certainly persuade you. How? Use your imagination. Watch. Give me a ring when you've seen enough." The call ended. I called the police, lied about some vague phone threats from a stalker. An officer came to search the house. When he found nothing, he promised he would be in the area and gave me his number. I was so worried about my physical safety that I never quite wrapped my head around what the madman actually threatened me with. He's careful, but I can see his pattern in the disappearances and killings that go unsolved. I've unleashed a quiet terror on the world, a man whose CRAV's death, who cannot be killed, and whom no one is looking for. And he wants to make me pay. I know what I have to do to stop him. I know I'm the only one who can. But I'm scared of what it means to take on that pain myself. Every time I think I'm strong enough, I think back to those screams of agony from the witness gallery and the smell of burning flesh. Maybe justice can wait a little longer? Story 3. Never look out the window at night. I was awoken by the sound of rain pattering against my window. My eyes slowly stretched open, darkness consuming my vision as I stared up at the pitch-black ceiling. A flash brightened my room for a second, revealing every inch, hidden behind the blanket of black. I rolled my head around, eyes darting to the window beside my bed. I could only see the sky, dark like my room apart from the occasional flash. It took me a minute to wake up and realize what I was doing. When I did, I quickly tossed my head to the other side of my pillow. I was now facing the wall. Panic slowly started to rise in my chest. My heart thumped loudly, even louder than the thunder. I squinted, my eyes shut, my breathing heavy and strained. I had looked out the window. Now, you might be wondering why this is such a bad thing. Ever since I was small, I was told by almost everyone not to look out the window at night. Whenever I would ask why, I would receive a dull response. Something bad will happen was the usual answer. I wasn't the only person raised with this rule. Every kid in my class was told the same thing, and all of us were equally as confused by it. I figured it was some stupid ploy my town had thought up to keep kids from staying up late. That was until last year when Brody Heathens looked out the window one night. Brody thought the story was nothing but horseshit, and he was determined to prove so. He told the entire school that he would look out his window that night and tell us what happened the next morning. We were all excited, thinking that Brody was as brave as can be, going against our communal rule. I was excited to be at school the morning. I couldn't wait for Brody to arrive and report on what had happened. He was late that day. He came into class looking tired, pale, and sickly. At lunch, we all rushed to ask him what happened. He didn't say anything, only looked down at the pitiful ham sandwich in his hands. No matter how many times we asked, or how loud we asked, he wouldn't answer. A few people were worried, but most brushed this off, thinking that he was playing a joke. I didn't think he was joking. He looked genuinely affected. He was quiet that whole day, which was more than shocking, as Brody had always been a loudmouth who struggled to keep it down during lessons. I don't think he spoke a word that whole day. He didn't come to school the day after, or the day after that, or any day for the entire week. By now, everyone was concerned. On the second week of Brody not coming to school, we were all called into the assembly hall. There, the school confirmed that Brody had committed suicide and that there would be a ceremony for him in the gym during lunch. The school was silent that day. Only the muffled sobs of Brody's mourning friends filled the halls. We all knew that whatever he saw out the window that night must have driven him to do this. People's curiosity refused to let them leave the topic alone. Suzanne Walters was next. She looked out her window one night and hung herself less than a week later. Then it was Jack Richmond. He looked out his window too and had shot himself in the head with his dad's rifle 3 days later. 3 deaths in 1 month. Everyone was terrified, and we all knew that something was causing them to do this. Something was torturing every person that looked out their window at night. I vowed that I would never do it, but now I had. I lay silent in my bed. The sound of rain grows steadily louder. I waited for something to happen, but nothing did. After a few minutes of sweating and laying still as a statue, I rolled my head back out, peering back out to the sky. I started to calm down. It wasn't so scary, dark, but not scary. A confident feeling rose in me. I'm not sure why or how this feeling began, but it was impossible to ignore. I lifted myself up from my mattress, my sheet sticking to my sweat-stained back. I poked my head over the side and looked out the window. There was nothing there. A few dim street lights flicked in the darkness, and a flash of lightning would illuminate the street, revealing nothing but puddles of rain and blacked-out houses resting peacefully beside the sidewalk. Stupid, I chuckled to myself, turning my head to flop back down into my comforter. But something caught my eye just as I moved my head. Something was sitting in the corner of my room. I felt my heart freeze and stop. It was still pitch black in my room, so I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a person. They sat on the floor, knees pulled up to their chest, hands clutching their legs as their head was bowed low, face hidden behind their thighs. I couldn't look away from the figure, convinced if I did, it would jump up and rush me. I couldn't move, terrified that if I did, the figure would notice me. Slowly, the figure began to raise its head, bright orange eyes peering at me through the thick darkness. A cracking sound followed in pursuit. The figure rose to its feet. Once it was fully stood up, it was up to my ceiling. I didn't know what to do at that moment. I slowly inched my head towards my pillow, gently resting it against the fabric. I rolled over, slow as a snail, so I was facing my wall. The whole time, the figure stayed still, just watching me with its beady orange eyes. I shut my eyes as tight as I possibly could. I couldn't stop the waterfall of tears from dripping down my face, although I did my best to be as quiet as possible, apart from the occasionally loud sniffle. I'm not sure how, but eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up the next day. The sun beamed into my room, and the figure was gone. I jumped out of my bed and ran downstairs. My parents were sitting in the dining room, and behind them stood the figure. I could see it fully now. Its skin was a dry, muted gray, and it had two little slits in its face for nostrils. Wispy tufts of hair crept out from its scaly scalp. It had a long, skinny body. I could see its ribs poking out of its stomach. It had short, stubby, almost dinosaur-like arms, with nails as long and as sharp as knives protruding from its fingers. Its orange eyes glared at me, while it smiled, big and commercially white teeth poking out from its gray, chapped lips. "Mom," I muttered, baffled at how my parents couldn't see the figure looming behind them. "Yes, sweetie," she answered in a chipper and unbothered tone. "What's up, bud?" asked my dad. The figure cracked its neck down so its head was looking down at my father, eyes rolled up to the edges of its eyelids, gazing at me. "You're looking a bit pale," my dad said, worried. I wondered if I should tell them. It was obvious they couldn't see it. I choked down my fear and spoke with a hoarse voice. "I'm fine, just tried," I said. I sat down at the table. The thing looked at me the entire time I ate. I followed me to school, diving behind cars and trees every time I tried to look at it. I sat down in class. The thing was standing at the back of the class, watching me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. Its eyes felt like they were stabbing me. My friend, Dave, sat down next to me during lunch. "Dude, are you okay? You've been quiet today," he said. I looked up at him. The creature was standing behind him, waving its knife-like fingers around in a strange pattern. Was this the thing that Brody had seen? The thing that drove him to kill himself? I knew it would try and do the same to me. I wouldn't let it. I looked out my window last night. Dave went pale. There's a creature following me now. Nobody can see it but me. I think it drives you to take your own life. I'm not sure why, but it won't do that to me." I looked up at the creature. It was now snarling at me. I reached its hand up and clapped it down on Dave's head. I watched Dave freeze, and his eyes slowly rolled to the back of his head, blood pouring from them along with his ears and mouth. I jumped to my feet, a nauseous pit rising in my stomach. Dave fell to the ground, staining the grass with cherry red blood. "Dave," I shouted. "What?" His voice came from behind me. I turned. Dave was standing there alive, but he was also lying on the floor, dead. I felt dizzy. I couldn't keep my head straight. My head throbbed as I tumbled to the floor and blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a dark room. There was nothing in the room but a bed. The creature was lying on top of me, face inches away from mine. I wanted to scream, but nothing would leave my mouth. Slowly, the creatures bent down, drool spilling onto my face and into my mouth, choking me. He opened his jaw wide, his jagged white teeth ready to rip me to shreds. "Alex," I opened my eyes. I was lying in a hospital bed, bandages wrapped around my temple, and then pumping fluids into my body. My mother was sitting beside me, clutching my wrist. "You're awake. You're finally awake," she cried. What my dad said next made my blood run cold. "Why would you drink that rat poison? What were you trying to do? Kill yourself?" I looked up at the small window on my hospital room door. The creature stood there, grinning as its glowing orange eyes pierced right through me. Story 4. This is not real. You need to wake up. "Have a good night, Roman," the receptionist said to me as I walked past her desk while she was getting ready to close up. I smiled and waved as I left the gym and entered the brisk night air. Checking the time as my stomach made a gurgling sound, I saw that it was 9:47 p.m., and every fast food place in my small town would be closed by now. I looked across the road and saw that the local grocery store was open until 10, so I started lightly jogging towards it. The cold breeze biting through my clothes and attacking my face and neck. Since I didn't dry off my hair properly after showering, a wave of warmth hit me in the face as I stepped into the store, causing my eyes to water slightly. "Attention shoppers, the store will be closing in 10 minutes, so please start making your way to the checkouts. Thank you, and have a good night," a woman's voice echoed over the intercom. I hurriedly grabbed a pre-made sandwich and headed towards the drinks aisle. With my head down, I walked, reading the label of my less than exciting dinner, and I decided I would grab another sandwich on my way out. When I looked up, I found myself staring into the aisle I had entered, only to see my ex-girlfriend, Natalie, standing there with her boyfriend, Ari. Her eyes met mine, and I started to tear up again, but not because of the temperature of the air. She broke her gaze and continued talking to Ari, her expression never changing from the smile she had already been wearing before she saw me. I looked away and started making my way to the end of the aisle, walking past them, but not acknowledging them in the slightest. As I brushed past Ari, I realized how much bigger he was than me, at least 3 or 4 inches taller and probably a good 20 kgs heavier. For reference, I'm 6'2" and weigh 92 kgs lean, so I'm not small by any stretch, but this guy dwarfed me. As I grabbed a Red Bull, I wondered to myself why it had hit me that hard. It had been years since I dated her and years since she drifted out of my life. We were 16 when she confessed her feelings for me, 5 years ago now. We had been good friends before that, and we were still good friends after I broke up with her, but I took her for granted, so when she started becoming a less consistent part of my life, I was too stubborn to tell her that I missed her. I was snapped out of my own internal dialogue suddenly as my phone started vibrating in my pocket, emitting a strange analog beeping sound that I hadn't heard it make before. I looked around to see Natalie and Ari looking confused while also staring at their phones. This is an emergency alert. Get to the nearest enclosed structure immediately. Close and lock all doors and windows. Turn off all the lights, and do not make any noise that will be detectable from outside the structure. If you are in your house, close the blinds and fill as many containers with water as you can. If you are in a public structure, such as a store or a recreational facility, then follow as many of those same steps as you can. If you are in a vehicle, shut off the engine and lock the doors. For all who are listening to this alert, do not look into the fog, and under no circumstances should you go outside. This alert will repeat once every 12 hours, and any updates will be shared periodically. You should be prepared to stay indoors for at least a week. This is not a drill. Stand by for updates. All the phones in the store blared in unison. There was a moment of complete silence as the few late-night customers in the store looked over to the closing staff, who were just as dumbfounded as everyone else. Then the store broke out into a hurried panic as who I assume was the store supervisor made her way to the back of the store to shut off the lights, while the other two ladies who were at the checkouts began to lock the doors. I went to call Marcus, my mate who's in the Air Force, to ask what the hell is going on, but there was no signal at all. No, fuck this, bro. Ari shouted in anger as he grabbed Natalie by the wrist and started walking her over to the sliding glass door that was in the process of being locked. As the lights all dimmed out row by row, we were all left in pitch black darkness, excluding the glowing sign of the service station across the street and the barely visible streetlights outside that were being drowned out by the thick fog that everyone had just noticed. Ari turned on his phone's flashlight and kept walking in the darkness until Natalie pulled away from him. "We can't go out there, Ari. There's something wrong with that fog." Natalie yelled at her partner. "Let me out right fucking now." Ari shouted at the poor lady who had just locked the place up. "I can't do that, sir," she replied softly, causing him to start banging on the glass, threatening to break it. "Ari, please. Calm down, babe. Can't we just wait until we know what's going on?" Natalie begged as she grabbed Ari's forearm and attempted to stop him from shattering the only thing separating us from the strange mist outside. "Dude, come on. You don't know what's out there," I interrupted. "It could be a chemical attack or something. Just at least wait until we get an update. Man," I tried to reason, but it was no use. "Fuck you, pussy. I'm not getting held against my will in a supermarket. Who the hell would chemical attack New Zealand, dumbass?" He responded to my reasoning. This is something I had already been thinking. It wouldn't explain why we had to turn the lights out, and it wouldn't explain why we had to remain quiet. But I was hoping that he wouldn't be able to think all that through. "Let me out," I said. "What the fuck don't you understand, bitch?" He shouted at the top of his lungs as he shoved Natalie off his arm and onto the hard epoxy floor, then resumed his banging on the glass, but much harder now. "You gotta let him out," I said to the grocery worker as I helped Natalie to her feet. The rest of the dozen customers who were in the store had crowded behind us, watching the whole thing go down. "He's gonna get us all killed if he breaks that glass," I argued. "Let him out," the worker reluctantly put in the code for the door's automatic opening system to activate, and the glass began to slide to the side. Ari looked back at Natalie in rage, seeing that she was not going to leave with him. The large man then walked out, and the doors shut behind him, immediately being locked by the store lady, whose hands were now shaking. We all watched in silence as Ari's silhouette disappeared into the fog, until the only thing we could make out was his phone's flashlight gently glowing through the mist. All of a sudden, it seemed like he had stopped moving. The light didn't get any dimmer or seem to be getting further away at all. As around 17 of us observed from the darkness of the grocery store, a loud shriek was released into the night, and Ari began sprinting back to the door, and his banging resumed. "Let me the fuck back and there's something out he began to shout, but was cut off as his legs were pulled out from under him, and the wind was knocked out of his lungs as he landed hard on his stomach, his nose cracking on the concrete. Natalie went to scream, but I covered her mouth, and we both watched as Ari was dragged back into the fog by a tall, lanky humanoid silhouette, still clutching onto his phone. Eventually, the light from his flashlight was completely engulfed by the wall of fog, and we were all left with our mouths agape and tears in our eyes as the severity of our situation set in. Nobody really said much over the next couple of hours. Everyone was too shaken up, I guess. At around 1:15 a.m., I checked my phone as Natalie lay on top of me, fast asleep, her face buried into my hoodie. She had been crying since. Well, we all watched what happened to Ari. After that, everyone found a place to themselves, and Natalie held on to me, soaking my shoulder with her tears, which made their way down to my skin. I hated that I was happy at that moment. I felt so selfish about being content in her sorrow, but I missed her so much. I missed her more than I let myself know, and was just thankful that I had her there with me. I thanked God that I didn't have to go through this nightmare alone. I fell asleep shortly after, closing my eyes and taking in the noises around me, the humming of the fridges, Natalie's soft breathing, gentle sobs from across the store, and I'm sure a couple of times I heard screams in the distance outside the apparent security of this store. I awoke to my phone vibrating again, but it was only my 7:30 a.m. alarm. Natalie must have already been awake because she was holding me tight, and there were fresh tears on my hoodie. I lay there for a bit hugging her, ignorant to the world that, for all I knew, was ending anyway. I was also ignorant to the fact that the sun hadn't come up, or at least, it wasn't reaching us through the fog, meaning that it must be completely encasing us. How far does the fog stretch? How far would it have to extend into the sky for not even a hint of daylight to shine through? These are questions I did not have because I was holding on to the girl who I had never really stopped loving, making me probably the only person at that moment who was trapped in a dream, not a nightmare. Natalie and I ate breakfast in silence. I guess there are worse places to be trapped than a well-stocked grocery store. However, as AM rolled around, a new alert sounded out from everyone's phones. This is an emergency alert. It is still very unsafe outside, so stay where you are. Keep all the lights off, and do not make any noise that will be detectable from outside your structure. Avoid looking into the fog or standing in a position where you are visible from the outside. Cover as many windows as possible and preferably hide in a room that can be locked off from the rest of your structure if necessary. If something is in your structure or is trying to get inside, then it knows you're there. In this scenario, hide. Do not attempt to confront it under any circumstances. Notable updates. The electrical and water systems will not be operational by this time tomorrow, so if you have not done so, fill up as many containers with water as you can. You will receive another alert every 12 hours. Thank you. Stand by for any updates. I stood up and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back from sitting on the hard supermarket floor, and my legs had pins and needles. I looked down at Natalie, who seemed lost in thought. I wasn't sure if she had heard the update, but then again, what did it matter? The loss of power would mean that all the refrigerated items would spoil, but there was enough long-lasting food to feed us all for months, probably drinks as well. I knew our biggest problem would be warmth, as we would lose the electronic heating system, but before I could think any more on that, a commotion broke out on the other side of the store. A loud crash echoed across the whole building, and as Natalie and I made our way towards the noise, we discovered that one of the other guys who was trapped in here must have been in his late 50s at least, had been using his free time to get absolutely wasted in the alcoholic section of the store, and was now yanking boxes of booze off of the shelves as he drunkenly laughed to himself. Before I could do anything, another man, maybe in his early 30s, tackled him to the ground and pinned him down, all without saying a word. As the older guy lay there, asking what the problem was in slurred, barely comprehensible English, everyone in the store felt their hearts sink as a loud thumping sound was heard from the front door. And then again and again, until one of the 3 store workers, who wandered over to see who was over there, let out an almost impossibly loud scream, and that was what sealed our fate. The store erupted into chaos as the glass door was shattered, and an inhuman shriek reverberated in our ears as whatever was outside was no longer outside. I looked to Natalie, who appeared to be frozen in place, teary-eyed as she breathed rapid and shallow breaths. I took her by the hand and ran as fast as I could towards the storage room out back. I knew they had to have one in order to hold onto the stock that they couldn't fit on the shelves yet. But as we reached the door, screams and roars filled the store behind us. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that it was locked. I shook the handle out of desperation and then tried to open the other larger door that the forklifts came in and out of, but I didn't know the code. I embraced Natalie, and I guess I just prepared for it to end until I heard and looked back over to the door to see that the store supervisor was holding it slightly ajar while gesturing for us to quickly come inside. We ran to the entrance and left the main part of the building, where we found the supervisor and the other surviving employee, along with one other customer who had apparently been in here ever since Ari was killed. The lights were on in the storage room because there were no windows, which took a while to adjust to after being in total darkness for the last 12 hours, but it was a nice change. Over the course of the day, we heard many thumps and bangs. Occasionally, something would get knocked over, and glass would smash. Whatever was out, there was looking everywhere for survivors, but we were safe in here. Natalie and I made a bed out of a few 20-kilogram sacks of rice, which was honestly so much nicer than the floor. The other 3 people in there with us tried to ask us about ourselves, our lives, but I did most of the talking. Natalie was still grieving, and the others understood that, though I did see her smile a couple of times, which was nice. The other employee didn't say much. I assumed it was because of what happened to the female staff member after the door shattered, so I didn't really try to push him for conversation. Honestly, I wasn't really in a social mood myself, but it was just nice to have some sense of normalcy after the shit show that has been our lives over the last couple of days. On day 4, I remembered what the alert had said about the power shutting off. It turns out there's a backup generator that should power everything we need for another couple of days, with most of the lights in the store being off, so it really felt like we were home free. At 10 o'clock on the 4th night, I heard the emergency alert sound off from across the room as I lay next to Natalie, since both of our phones had died already. I tried to listen in on what it was saying, but I couldn't quite make it out from where I was, so I got up in the dark and made my way over to the soft glow of the supervisor's phone screen. By the time I could hear what was being said, I only just caught the end of it. Be prepared to stay inside indefinitely. You will receive another alert every 12 hours. Thank you. Stand by for any updates. My heart sank to my stomach hearing this, and as I looked over to the supervisor who shared my expression, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Indefinitely? I mean, it would be easier for us having all of this stock to ourselves. But what about people trapped in their houses, their cars? How were they expected to survive this? As I pondered to myself, I turned around, suddenly startled by the sound of the male employee speaking for the first time since we'd been here. "Fuck this," was all he said as he entered the code for the large door, which made a loud mechanical whirring as it lifted up. I didn't even have time to process what had happened. I didn't have time to be angry at this man for killing us, and I didn't have time to sprint back to Natalie before I heard her being dragged away by one of those creatures, her hands squeaking across the floor as they tried and failed to grip onto it. The creature was pale, humanoid, but not human. If you've ever seen a hairless chimpanzee, it kind of looked like that, but its limbs were grotesque and distorted, too long for its body, and its face was more human. Its skin was a light gray color, pulled tightly over its strangely proportioned body. I noticed how it was shrieking, an ungodly sound, but its face was expressionless, its mouth only slightly open as it screamed. I think that was the weirdest part. I thought all of this as I watched this hideous thing drag the girl I love into the consuming darkness of the grocery store. That's when something grabbed me by the leg and pulled it out from under me, causing me to hit my head on the floor, and everything faded to black. Truth or dare? Natalie asked me. Truth, I replied. Natalie thought for a moment before Sarah, my mate Marcus Mrs., who was sitting next to her, whispered in her ear, causing a massive grin to form on her face. Okay, she giggled as she adjusted her posture and looked me in the eyes, trying to keep a straight face. Okay, Roman, if you were stuck on an island with all of us, who would you eat first? I thought for a moment as I looked around the hot tub at all of my close friends. My eyes landed on Max, who is quite overweight, and I couldn't help but smile, causing everyone to laugh, including Max, who splashed water in my face and retorted, "I'd eat all of you before you got the chance," to which Marcus said, "We believe you, bud." And everyone burst out into laughter again. Okay, Natalie. Truth or dare? I asked. Truth, she replied without hesitation. I pretended to ponder my question for a moment. Would you, I began as I stood up in the pool, clutching something in my left hand, make me the happiest man in the world, I continued as I got down on one knee before her, and marry me? I asked as I held a ring out of the water for her, eliciting a gasp from both of my mates and their partners. Natalie's eyes began to tear up, and she asked, "Are you for real?" covering her mouth with her shaking hands. I nodded yes, and she screamed out, "Yes, of course, I will," before she jumped on top of me, taking us both underwater as she kissed me. After we all dried off and said our goodbyes, Max came up to me. "Hey man, congratulations. Honestly, I've been waiting for this day since you guys met. Always knew she was the one for you," he said. I looked at him for a moment before replying, "What do you mean, bro? When I first started dating her, you told me that she was no good for me. It's like one of the main reasons I broke up W. That's when the words I was saying hit me in the face like a bag of bricks." Max stared at me, his smile not shifting in the slightest. "How long have you and Natalie been together now?" he asked. "Must be around 5 years. About time you popped the question. Haha," he chuckled, but with every second that passed, my heart started beating more and more rapidly. "This isn't real," I said before squeezing my eyes shut and waking up. A long tendril slid out of my throat as I fell to the ground below and threw up everywhere. I looked up to see a giant glowing figure with a dozen other tendrils protruding from its shoulders. The skinny figure stood still, its frame reaching the height of the streetlight next to it. As I tried to make sense of what I was looking at, my eyes made their way down its inhuman body. At the end of each glowing blue tendril was a person, the tendrils entering through each of their mouths, seemingly absorbing something from their bodies as pulsating rings of light emanated from the person and up the tendril. I almost threw up for a second time until I saw Natalie among the dozen bodies attached to the creature. Without hesitation, I reached up to touch her hand, and as I did, I lost consciousness again. "Unzip the tent, babe, let some light in," I said as I wiped the sleep from my eyes and cracked my stiff back, cursing myself for forgetting an air mattress on a trip we'd been planning for months. I watched and admired my beautiful fiancée as she got up half naked and unzipped our tent. I hope you slept better than I did, I muttered as I lay back down in my sleeping bag. Babe, you should have had the air mattress. I would have been happy to trade places, Natalie replied as she opened up her pack and started rummaging through it. Nah, I'm fine, honestly. I'm not letting my fiancé sleep on the ground, I retorted, my arm covering my eyes, immediately regretting that I got Natalie to let the sun in. You're such a man, she scoffed jokingly as she tossed me one of the pre-made sandwiches from her pack. I paused for a moment, a split second of déjà vu overtaking my body as I read the label. All of a sudden, I sat up straight in my sleeping bag. Natalie, this isn't real. None of this is real, I said to her in a panic, causing her to stare at me concerned. Are you feeling okay, Roman? She asked. Did you get any sleep at all? Natalie, the grocery store, the fog, the emergency alert. Don't you remember? None of this is real. We aren't together. We aren't engaged. I spoke quickly, my voice trembling as I tried to get her to snap out of this false reality. I watched as Natalie's face went white and her eyes filled with tears. What's going on? What is the? She started to speak, but was interrupted by a familiar shriek in the distance. I looked out of the tent to see at least 1,000 of those chimp creatures making their way towards us, seemingly sensing that we weren't being fooled by this illusion any longer. Natalie, you have to wake up, I yelled, the creatures getting closer. Close your eyes and wake. I regained consciousness and caught Natalie as the tendril slid out of her throat, letting her fall. She threw up onto the ground as I held her, before staring back up at the massive glowing creature. That's when we looked around. In the distance, there were more glowing creatures, hundreds of them spread out over the town. We can see through the fog, Natalie stated, which I honestly hadn't even noticed until then. That's when we heard frantic screaming and looked to our left. One of those chimp creatures was dragging a man out of his car and over to the glowing figure. We watched as one of the tendrils violently shoved its way down the man's throat, and his screaming stopped. Then the other creature just walked off, paying us absolutely no mind. Natalie then looked back up at the bodies attached to the tendrils and gasped as she saw Ari. She went to reach for him, but I grabbed her hand. Natalie, if you touch him, you'll go back in, and there's no guarantee that you'll ever come back out. It's like it completely wipes your memory every time, I told her. How do you know? She asked. Maybe I'll remember the second time. You won't, Natalie. I went back in for you, and I'm lucky that I remembered it all, I responded. She stared at me for a moment. Why did you go back in for me if it's such a big risk? She questioned. I paused, my eyes welled up. Because I love you, Nat. An explosion then went off in the distance. I saw it over Natalie's shoulder, then another, each one making its way closer, seemingly each being aimed at those glowing blue creatures. Run! I yelled as I grabbed Natalie's hand and sprinted away from Ari and the mass of glowing tentacles. Another explosion went off behind us as a plane roared overhead. The explosion also ignited the service station right next to us, which let off a shockwave that sent us flying off the street. Everything went silent, and I could feel my consciousness once again slipping away. The last thing I saw was Natalie silently screaming in my face, worry overtaking her expression, as she held tightly onto my hands. That's when I noticed a piece of fence sticking out of my abdomen. Shit, I thought to myself. As everything faded to black, I saw a group of military-looking men running towards Natalie and me, then nothing. I woke up to the voices of Natalie and Marcus talking to each other. I sat up in the apparent hospital bed I was in and immediately regretted it, holding onto my stomach in pain. Whoa, whoa, lay back down, bud. Just relax. Marcus said as he stood up from his chair and slowly laid me back down. Natalie stood up as well, tightly gripping my hand and kissing me on the forehead. What is this? Is the fog? Is it over? I asked, confused about how we were here right now in a hospital. No, it's not over. My higher-ups have decided that we have to start over. Most of the remaining world leaders have come to the same consensus. Marcus paused briefly. You two are lucky to have survived. Most people didn't. Those things. Those people are still alive, Marcus. I exclaimed. You can't just bomb the world when those people are still down there. They're in a trance, living in an illusion that those blue things are creating. I can't explain it, but I saw it. Natalie did too. I only got us out because I felt an unbelievable sense of déjà vu and realized it wasn't real. Marcus looked at me, his expression grave. I know, Roman. We're trying to figure out a way to deal with them without causing more harm. But right now, the priority is to keep everyone who's still here safe. You and Natalie are the only ones who've had any interaction with those things and came back, and we need your help to understand what happened down there. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I'll do whatever I can to help. But we can't forget about them. They're still people trapped in a nightmare over the next few months. I recounted this story to more officials in suits than I can count. I told them how I had done twice what nobody else had done once. I went into the dream, as they call it, and I came back both times. Though I did manage to convince them not to bomb the world and kill everyone, it has come at a price. Natalie sobbed as I told her the plan. She cried into my shoulder, just as she did that night many months ago in the grocery store during the emergency alert. I felt her tears soak down to my skin as I told her that I had to go back into the dream and try to wake everyone up. The chance that I would not wake back up was sitting at the forefront of my mind, but I had to be strong for Nat. I just hope that if I do get trapped in a dream, that I'll get to go through with that wedding, I said to her softly, trying to put on a smile. If you don't come back, I'm coming in after you, she replied, tears in her eyes. I wanted to tell her no, I wanted to be selfless. But I knew that I would have no complaints if she and I were trapped together again. That selfish part of my brain was still active. On the November 14th, 2023, an emergency alert was sent to every mobile device across the globe. It warned of a thick fog that would swallow any who were caught in its midst, and the whole world locked themselves inside. You may be wondering why I'm telling you this story. You may be thinking to yourself, I don't remember the day the fog rolled in and the emergency alert sounded. That is why I'm telling you this story. This is not real. You need to wake up.